Hello everyone, my name is Youran, and today I'm going to talk about the development of Mandarin tones in bilingual children. In this presentation, I will introduce the educational and theoretical backgrounds, our population, and a new measurement for tone accuracy. I will also introduce our results and some further steps for our research. In terms of the bilingual education, our study is situated in Canada, where we have a larger project funded by SSHRC, and in that project, we care about the children who are enrolled in the public bilingual schools, including the French immersion and Chinese English bilingual schools. And we are especially interested in the children's speech development, including their French, Mandarin, and English speech. So specifically to our Chinese English bilingual education programs, in the schools, half of the class content is taught in English and the other half is taught in Mandarin Chinese. The student population here is very diverse. Some of them have English or Mandarin as their home languages, and some are multilingual children who are learning both English and Mandarin as their second languages at school. For those of you who are not very familiar with the concept of lexical tones, Mandarin is a tonal language where the pitch contours are used to differentiate meanings. Let's practice producing some tones together on the syllable da. When it's a level tone, high level tone, da means to build, da means to answer, da means to beat, da means big. If you found those confusing and challenging, you can imagine how hard it is for the children in Canada to learn these tones. And I want to provide some evidence about how tones are developed in monolingual children, just so as we know what to expect. In the earlier phonological focused studies, tones are claimed to be established very early. But in the more recent acoustic-informed studies, it seems like even in older ages, the children's tonal productions are not adult-like yet. However, both studies found that tone 3 is the most challenging for the monolingual children. Why is that? The complexity of tone 3 is multifaceted. So first, in the citation tones, which is the most formally produced and usually in isolation, the contour of tone 3 is a low falling rising tone. So it contains two sections of pitch contours, therefore it's just more complex than the others. And also the extremely low pitch range is usually more challenging for the younger children to produce. And then if you have a look at the contour of tone 2, you will also notice that both tone 2 and tone 3 have a rising trend in their pitch contours. Therefore, it's easier to confuse these two. And then when we're moving on to a larger speech unit, tone 3 is usually not actually produced as a citation tone. It experiences tone sandhi or tone changes. So when it's followed by another tone, tone 3 is usually realized as a semi-sandhi, where only the low falling part is produced. But when it's followed by another tone 3, it's realized as a full sandhi, where only the rising part is produced. Therefore, the contour of tone 3 becomes exactly the same as a tone 2. As a summary, tone 3 is phonetically complex and confusable, and also phonologically it experiences tone changes, therefore it's more variable. Now let's talk about the factors that can impact the bilingual children's learning of tones. I will start by talking about the more specific phonological effects, and then I will zoom out to look at the bigger picture of the learner factors. According to perceptual assimilation model, when the first language is not a tonal language, the target tones in the second language can be assimilated into the intonation patterns of the first language. Therefore, let's look at tone 2, which is a rising tone. Its pitch contour is pretty similar to the questioning intonation in both English and Mandarin. Therefore, we expect tone 2 to be the easiest to learn. On the other hand, what if there's no categories in the first language to be assimilated into? In these cases, the phonetic properties of the target tones would play an important role. I want to remind you again that tone 3 is the most phonetically complex tone. Therefore, we would expect tone 3 to be the most challenging for bilingual children to learn. And in terms of the learner factors, according to speech learning model, what matters is the quantity and quality of input. The quantity of input can be measured by the age of onset, which is actually an indicator of the length of exposure. And the frequency of exposure also matters, indicated by how frequently the learner is using this language to interact. On the other hand, the quality of input matters, which can be conceptualized into the authenticity of input and the stability of input. To understand these learner factors, we will really need to quantify the children's language environments at home and in the school. So our participants include 165 children who were enrolled in grade 1, 3, and 5 in the bilingual program. We used an extensive and quantitative parent questionnaire to collect the children's family language environment information. Just to give you an idea of the diverse languages at home, the children usually have Mandarin or English as their first or second languages, but they also have the other Chinese dialects and languages, as well as international languages at home. But when it's coming to the dominant language, which is defined by the most important language for the children currently, you see English is really dominating the children's language use. We use the principal component analysis to construct the children's quantity and quality of family input. Here is a plot of the children's family input in Mandarin and in English. You see that most of the children have very strong English input at home. Some have strong Mandarin. Some are not all that strong in both English and Mandarin, indicating they are having other languages at home. But children are seldom having strong English and Mandarin at home. In terms of the speech samples, we collected the children's tonal productions through a single word elicitation task where both monosyllabic and disyllabic words were included. We audio recorded the children's speech samples and segmented the target words. During this process, we also coded whether the words were produced spontaneously or by imitation. We used the Yvan, a software program for phonological corpora, to transcribe our speech samples. In addition to the 4 typical tonal categories, we also included uncategorizable, because sometimes the children's productions are just not standard. We cannot force it into a category. We use the 4 native speakers as our transcribers, and the reliability is reported. I want to give you 2 more examples about how uncategorizable production look like. So here, the pink one can be a good example of a low falling rising tone.
Show.
And the white one can be a good example of a rising tone.
Ren.
But the yellow one is just a bit hard to decide.
Jiao.
Similarly, the pink one, a good example of falling tone.
Cai.
The white one, a good example or an acceptable example of a flat tone.
Rou.
And the yellow one, a bit hard to decide.
Fan.
And together with the developers of Fang, we came up with this new measurement called PNTC, which is very similar to PCC and PVC that you guys are probably familiar with, but this is specifically for tone accuracy. Through PNTC, we can extract the tone inventory from transcription and compare the transcription as identified by the listeners against the intended target. Therefore, we will know the correctness of each target. And by pooling these correctness together, we can have a general idea of the tonal accuracy of each individual speaker. PNTC can also report the error patterns of the whole group and of the individual speakers. So in terms of the tone accuracy's development across grade levels, we found that grade, tone target, and the spontaneity of production all played a role in the correctness of the monosyllabic tones. The effect of spontaneity will be addressed by one of my colleague students in their poster presentation, so please make sure to have a look. Here, I'm going to talk about the effects of grade and tone. Apparently, grade does have a positive effect, but it seems like the significant improvement only happened between grade 1 and 3. And the children's tonal productions are lack of continuous development in the higher grades. The target of tone also has an effect. It seems that tone 3 is the most challenging, which is probably due to the complexity that we've been talking about. This is also consistent with the developmental patterns in monolingual children and with the bilingual teachers' observations. Meanwhile, tone 2 seems to have a slight advantage, probably due to its similarity to intonation, the question intonation. And we also have qualitative report from the teacher who said they do use question to prompt the understanding of tone 2 in their instructions. In terms of the error patterns, seems like tone 3 produced as tone 2 was the most prevalent error pattern, which is probably due to their phonetic similarities. On the other hand, uncategorizable was a common error for all the 4 tones. This is probably because the children relied on raw acoustic properties and they were lack of the categorical knowledge when they were producing the tones. In terms of the learner factors, we input all these variables to quantify the children's quantity and quality of input at home and their learning experiences in school as measured by the grade levels. We found that age of onset, input quality, language dominance, and grade levels all have a significant effect on the overall PNTC. The grade effect has been addressed earlier on, so here I'm only going to talk about the effects of the other independent variables. The dominant language has an effect only when the children report Mandarin to be their most important language. In those cases, their PNTC would be higher. And age of onset has a significant impact in that earlier age of Mandarin onset is related to higher tonal accuracy. In this sense, earlier is better. However, do notice that age of onset is not the only decisive factor. Meanwhile, age of onset is usually recognized as a macro variable that is related to quantity of input. Due to the significant correlation between these factors, it's hard to tease apart whether age is measuring the neural maturation or is it actually an indicator of the length of exposure. On the other hand, the quality of Mandarin home input also has a positive effect. Higher quality of home input in Mandarin is related to higher tonal accuracy. As a summary, tone 3 is more challenging for bilingual children to learn due to its phonetic and phonological complexity. Tone 2 has the highest accuracy, probably due to its similarity to the questioning intonation. Grade has a positive effect, showing the effectiveness of the learning experience in a bilingual school. Age of onset has an effect, but we are not sure whether it's due to the maturation or the quantity of input. However, when we're looking at the effects of language dominance and input quality, we would be more confident to say that it's the quantity and quality of family input playing a role there. So our take-home messages here are, the bilingual children's tonal accuracy is mainly impacted by the phonetic properties of the tone targets. And the learning process is impacted by the quantity and quality of input. Our future directions include a more specific look at the error patterns. So now we know that the most prevalent errors are tone 3 produced as tone 2 and uncategorizable. But what do those mean? What are the underlying mechanisms of such errors? Is it because the children were lack of phonological representation? Were they confusing the tonal targets? Are the tone targets phonetically difficult to produce? Or was it actually due to the first language transfer? And furthermore, which acoustic features are important that caused the listener's judgment of tonal inaccuracy? We will also have a look at the children's tonal productions in the disyllabic words and longer phrases. In those larger speech units, the children are faced with more complex pitch contours. They also need to implement the tone Sandy rules. And in the phrases, they also need to deal with the interactions between tones and intonation. So indeed, in this study, we're only looking at a very small proportion of the linguistic and learner factors. In the future, there are so many different interesting directions to be explored. Finally, a big shout out to our founders, as well as our amazing research team. But more importantly, thanks to our participating teachers, parents, and children. Thank you, everyone.